I stay bout it, I'm not pouting. Break through walls and climb it mountains. If you want it, scream it loud and show this world what they've been doubting. Never waiting on the world to catch up to me. Leave it in the rear view. I wish that it was up to me. The world would never fear new.
Okay, welcome back to the Braintainment Show. Today I'm really fortunate to be joined by JulieAnne Kelly, who specializes in the world of kinesiology, working with clients to break through emotional blocks and trauma, patterns of behavior, self-sabotage, to ultimately live a more productive and enjoyable life, which we talk a lot about on this program. And the work she's doing is probably not something we've dived too deeply before on this show. So look, it's an understatement to say that I'm excited to connect with you today. And from our brief chat off air the other day, I can really identify already how so much of what we'll unpack and talk about today has the potential to make some pretty dramatic shifts for people. So looking forward to diving in. With that said, welcome to the show, JulieAnne.
Thanks, Liam. Lovely to be here.
So to kick things off and sort of set the scene, provide some context, maybe just give us a snapshot of the work that you do and I guess why it is that someone might connect with you.
So my original training is as a kinesiologist, and I've studied coaching and NLP. So I'm a master NLP practitioner as well. And I found when I studied NLP first, and I find it incredible skill for learning to ask better questions and getting people to go deeper into why they may be acting out in a certain way or doing a certain behavior that they don't want to do anymore. But it was when I went to study kinesiology that, which for people who don't know is using muscle testing to find in accordance with the Chinese meridian system. And it helps us track where something is stored in the body. And so we used to always think that everything was stored in the brain, all our memories, all our trauma and experiences from the past. And a lot of work that is coming out now is realizing that, yes, the brain holds an incredible amount of information and accesses it, but actually it's stored in the body. And so the beauty of kinesiology is that it helps us track the root cause of a lot of those behaviors, beliefs, patterns within the body system. And then we work with specific points on those meridians or within certain organs and help to release that. So it's combining the two so that you get a more holistic, full embodied release of things that are in the way of you showing up and behaving the way that you want to or achieving the goals that you want to. And it's often actually we only start to realize things about ourselves when we start to stretch or we push ourselves out of our comfort zone. And then we're like, why isn't this easy? My brain decided to do it. But actually that's what activates all our limiting beliefs and our unconscious beliefs and patterns. And so the people that I tend to work with are often business people or entrepreneurs or other coaches who want to show up in a different way in either their relationships or their businesses, and just have more alignment and ease in who they are, so we kind of dive in deep.
It makes sense. And it strikes me as true because a lot of, my journey and a lot of stuff that I talk about in the show is very much around the psychology and the way the brain works and things like that. And then it only takes a moment in time to recognize that all the information in the world, you can have all the answers logically and have like this cognitive understanding of things, but you can still feel so heavy and lethargic and fatigued and all these things that show up in the body. So when we start talking about what we've just touched on there, it's like, man, I really start to connect with some of the possibilities in this space because how it shows up in the real world in our bodies, for me, is what I'm so fascinated by because it can be crippling at times or it can be like really fucking exciting and sort of alleviating of like any heaviness. And when that happens, it feels amazing, but it's like I don't always know what's working and what's not. So it's a bit of potluck. For you, I'd love to know what do you think are some of the common culprits, I suppose, in today's world that kind of lead to some of the problems that we experience, and then we'll unpack from there. Is it past traumas? Is it a stressful environment? Like what is it that would actually contribute to someone feeling a certain way to then connect with you?
Okay, so I feel like there's two parts to that. So what makes somebody come to me is often that they've hit a wall and they don't know where else to turn. And kinesiologists will often say that is that people come to them when they've exhausted every other avenue, and they're like, the traditional ways of dealing with this are just not working for me. And so they end up, a lot of people come to me through word of mouth and through recommendation. And they're dealing with something that they can't seem to get past. And the reasons that people come is often because, so a lot of the work that I do, instead of kind of saying, oh, well, let's just get rid of that problem, which is often what we want to do. We're just like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I just don't want to feel this way. And actually the only way, one of the most powerful ways to shift that is actually to go deeper in. And so a huge part of the work that I do is assisting people in getting out of the mind and dropping into the body. And I do that in every session. So a session will often look like starting with what more traditionally looks like talk therapy. So what's going on, what's working this week, what's not working. And it can just be and the more people work with me, the more free they feel, open to bring anything to the session. It's like anything that's not working that week is probably inadvertently tied into the very thing that you want to clear. We often fragment things in our brain and saying, well, no, that's a problem over in this area. And actually what kinesiology does, what it consistently reflects back to people is, no, that is not how we function as humans. We are holistic beings. And often the very thing that you think is not associated is probably definitely associated. And so it's a mix of dropping people into their bodies and holding space. And when I say space, I mean like energetic space, but really presence for the very thing that they don't want to deal with anymore. And so when you can create a safe space for people to be present with that, that's when their own inner wisdom starts to speak to them. So instead of running away from it, we actually speak to the very thing that you don't want to, that is too daunting to hold space for by yourself. And when we go in there, it's first like kind of dropping into the body and thinking, and actually holding space for it. And when you do that, you realize it's not as bad as I thought. There's no need to kind of get away from it. And once we've done that, then we can clear it. Then we can bring it into balance. Then we can clear the old stories and patterns of beliefs around it. And so a lot of the work that I do is helping people not avoid the things that they want to deal with. It's this huge part of this emotional avoidance that creates an energetic heaviness within the body, because what happens is that loops in the background. We think because we're not consciously thinking of it or we've pushed it away that it's dealt with, but actually it's energetically exhausting you in a background loop. And that's when we start to feel lethargic and tired, or things become heavier, we get foggy thinking, we just don't feel like we're living an inspired life or we're living in alignment. And that's a huge part of what we do in sessions, and people feel it. They feel it in their bodies immediately afterwards. They're like, there's like a release just by actually holding space for that thing and then letting it go after it's given you the wisdom of why it showed up in the first place.
Yeah. I suppose just on that as well, it becomes almost like a bit of a cycle where in terms of avoidance, if we're constantly avoiding, slipping into the body and being aware of these things, or we're just avoiding exploring, pain points or whatever it might be, for fear that it's going to, because it doesn't feel nice at the time, at least we don't think it will. If we're constantly avoiding, have you found that almost reinforces the potency, I suppose, of how that shows up in the body, for example? So if someone comes to you and they've maybe spent the last 10 years with some real emotional trauma they haven't cleared or worked through properly, it's just further being reinforced the more they kind of avoid it. Is that something that you found in your experience?
Totally. So it's the thing that we kind of push down. When our body will give us signals that things need to be dealt with, and if we ignore the whispers, then we'll end up having to deal with the yells, and our body cannot sustain things not being processed. And so it starts to, when you look at it from a kinesiology perspective, they're stored on certain meridian channels. So everything in the body is energy. We are energetic beings primarily before anything else. And yet we consistently perceive ourselves as matter, that we are muscles and bones and brains, and actually all of that is energetic frequency primarily. And so when there is a disturbance in the energetic frequency, it gets stored on an energetic channel that is associated with muscles, organs, and channels within the body. And so when we consistently load those meridians or those energetic systems within the body with things that we don't want to deal with, it inevitably affects our organs. It inevitably affects the things that lie on those meridian systems. And so, that we start to become sick. And it's not to simplify and say every sickness is just associated with with undealt with emotion, but you can probably find the undealt with emotion in there, absolutely, as an element of the sickness.
I think I'm sure everyone listening could relate in some capacity, even if it's a small scale example. But I know, well, I'm assuming all of us have some memory or situation when we've felt a certain way that we didn't like, whether it was anxious or nervous or ridiculed or whatever it might be, that we've, I guess, kind of, quote unquote, dealt with, but not really. We've just kind of stored it away. And then when we start to think about that, I'm sure even just bringing up this conversation, people listening might already have a visceral sort of response by remembering what that might be. So I think it's pretty clear to recognize that, okay, maybe there's some opportunities for all of us to start actually clearing that emotional heaviness so it doesn't show up in the body in a certain way. And one really kind of quick example, just to digress a little bit, I'll talk a bit about on the show about my story. Long story short, I had a really bad head trauma, which threw me around and still shows up to this day, 5 years later, in terms of some physical symptoms. But there was, it for a long period of time, a real kind of, it would show up in my body just thinking about not so much the incident, but more so just the couple of years of rehab and stuff like that. And I'd immediately feel anxious and heavy and tight and scared and low on confidence and all those things just by reflecting on that memory of those last couple of years. Whereas now, whilst there's still some, physical and emotional stuff that I'm working through from that, I can talk about that experience with, almost like a level of gratitude for what I learned. And it's sort of that pain isn't there. So I've still got a lot of work to do, but the point remains, so much shows up in ways we probably don't realize until we start to explore it. So I suppose I'm curious, if someone listening is resonating with this, is there kind of a secret sauce, or is there a one-two approach to kind of to deal with everyone? Or is it very much a person by person, situation by situation, in terms of trying to find, I guess, a solution? I don't know if that's the right word, but trying to find, getting that person to a place of peace and feeling light and feeling like they have cleared, that emotional baggage, if that makes sense.
It is very unique to each person. You would know, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know from, the things that you talk about, that we have imprint periods, different imprint periods in our lives. And so 0 to 7 is an incredibly powerful imprint period in our lives. And it's because our brain waves are in more of a hypnotic state. And so we're just like sponges. We are just absorbing what is going on around us. And as children, our first language is energy. It's not words. So we are literally seeping in all the energetic frequencies, the unspoken conversations that are happening around us. And we, as humans, always want to make meaning out of things so that our brain can find resolution and then relax. So if you think, a lot of the work that I do we go back to the very first time that something was anchored into the energetic body or the nervous system as a block or a meaning or a significant incidents that they anchored to something they're experiencing now as an adult. And often it shows up in that 0 to 7 period. And if you think about it, people, even if I have clients that say, but I had a good childhood, it's kind of irrelevant, because we can have an argument that makes us feel bad, with our parents, or get told off about something. And it's the first time we felt shame, or it's the first time we felt guilt, or we've been compared to a sibling, because our parents are good parents, but they're at their wits' end. And or we won something and we didn't get the recognition that we felt we deserved. And we anchor those experiences in to winning, to succeeding, to achieving what it is that we want. And then when we're, you scan out 20 years, 25 years, 35 years, we don't understand why we keep searching for something when we go to reach for a goal and so what those stories are is what kinesiology can track. That's the work that I do, is going back in and finding out, well, what are you making this mean? What is the story that you're telling yourself? What is the pattern or behavior that needs to be released and re-engaged with from an adult, from a new perspective, that will actually be in alignment with you getting what you want in your life. And so we all, whether we've had significant trauma in our lives or, less intense trauma, we've all made meaning out of something that as an adult is no longer serving us. If you think about a child, everything's magnified. We're little people looking up at the world. Everything seems bigger. Everything seems more intense. And so we quite often can make things mean something that somebody else in the room would never have perceived that it would have meant that. And we just unconsciously lock them in. And so those, it's a mix of the work that I do. I work with some clients on significant trauma. And when I say significant trauma, I mean, what the external world perceives as significant. When we're dealing with our own trauma, it's always significant for us.
Yep.
But I mean the more traditional term of trauma. And then I work with other clients of helping them realize that actually something might have felt traumatic for them, but they were never allowed to process it in that way. It was minimized. And actually sometimes in the minimizing of an intense experience for a child, we cause trauma because we don't allow them to move through it. As a childhood traumatic experience, even if we think it's small, that lack of allowing them to fully experience it at the time gets stored in the body as trauma. And so it's going back and finding each person's, the individual's block, or what's stored, or what's not in alignment with what they want right now. And so it is quite personal. But really it's going back in. And so when I say going back in, I mean going back into the body.
Yep.
And finding out what's being stored, because as a child, we can go through a significant experience, but actually a lot of the psychology work now says, well, actually a child can actually go through quite a bit. Like they can have an accident or have a significant experience. They did a lot of studies with children after the 9/11 incident, and they realized that if a child is allowed to process their experiences, if they're allowed to retell the story, sometimes up to 50 to 100 times, they keep revisiting it because they want to find resolution for what happened. And if they're allowed to do that, the impact of it on them over a prolonged period of time is actually quite minimal. It's when we try to soothe them by getting them to stop processing and just move on, that's actually when we cause the damage. And if you think about how many times as kids we're told, you don't stop crying, you don't need to cry, everything's okay. It's actually in those little micro moments that quite a lot of our imprints get made, stored. So
Yeah, I feel like that idea of, us all making meaning of things, I really resonate with a lot. And it's like, it gets kind of scary when you start to recognize, particularly like you said, in that imprint age as a child, we almost don't have enough of the tools yet to be able to make accurate sense of things. So like you kind of touched on there, it's like, rightly or wrongly, we're making meanings of things. And you add in the impact of cultural norms and things like that, what's considered okay to share, what's not. And it's so easy to see how like we're just creating this like problematic society almost, to get quite broad, where we get to 25, 35, 45, 55 years of age, and these things that have been blocked just show up in so many ways. And I wanted to kind of transition the conversation into limiting beliefs, which you alluded to a bit there as well. Like we're making meaning of these situations, these traumas, and we've got these blocks in our body, and we start building our own narrative, which keeps us captive very often from going after goals or trying to become a certain person. And very often we don't know that we're doing that. It's almost that unconscious self-narrative. So is there any kind of processes that you can share with us, that, or any like practical steps, I suppose, that you do that might help to start getting awareness of what some of those unconscious, narratives are, so that we can then start to, because I imagine it's almost impossible to do anything if you don't know what the problem is. So how do we start getting that awareness of what our limiting beliefs might be?
So there's a couple of ways. So the place that limiting beliefs show, I mean, they show up all over the place, right? But the place that we tend to become aware of, like, something's not working here, is when we set a goal, right? So we set a goal about something that we want. And if we use business as an example, I'd like to make X amount of money, or I'd like to grow my business by a certain percentage. And we set a time frame, and then our normal mode of moving forward with that is, okay, well, what are the steps between where I am now and how to get there? And we go about the how, like, oh, well, if I do this and this and this, and we're working very much with this action equals this result. And yes, in lots of ways, actions do equal results. But, if you ask yourself, how many times have you made a plan and you've done the steps because that's what everybody else does, and then you realize, oh, this isn't working for me? And so it's quite often, there can be a number of things that go wrong in that. It could be that actually you're not following through in the steps, and that can be a limiting belief, like, I can't cold call, or I don't know how to build rapport easily, or this feels really unnatural to grow my business this way because I've been told these are the steps that I should do. I'm not a huge believer in that. I think everybody has unique gifts that they bring to business and their life, and that actually we gain a lot of freedom by giving ourselves permission to follow our intuition as to how we should grow our business. I'm a huge believer in that. I think when we decide that we have to follow everybody else's rules, that's when we get energetically squished and we stop trusting our intuition. So when we go to take an action that is designed to move our business forward. And the thing that I teach clients to become very aware of is tuning into your goals. And so it's a simple exercise of closing your eyes down, taking a few deep breaths, and connect. So dropping out of the mind, because we think our mind has all our answers, but it actually is designed incredibly well to keep us safe. It's the thing that will reference the past and say, oh, you did that before, and that did not feel good. That brought up a lot of stress or anxiety. And so it'll, or do you remember how that didn't work out? And so it'll reference and generalize about stories from the past, and then guide us to not do things to keep us safe and to keep our nervous system safe. So it's not always the place that guides us the best. And so dropping out of the mind and dropping into the body can be a really good place to go. And so it can be just really simple to dropping your energy down into the body through a couple of deep breaths. So actually we can do it now. So is there, like, if we do it together, is there something in your business that you would really like, or something that you are changing in your business at the moment that you would like to move towards?
Well, this could not be any better timed. By the time this episode comes out, it should be public knowledge, so it's all good. But outside of this program and the work I do in this space for a living, I have a travel business. And so just a travel agency that I started a couple of years ago after working in retail for 10 years, really solid database, great customers. And then obviously with COVID, it's just been a nightmare, sort of 18, 12, what will end up being a 2-year nightmare. So long story short, I've made the decision to exit out of that business, and I'm in the process of doing that. And it's all kinds of emotions. Like, part of it's the identity crisis, like, who the fuck am I if I'm not a travel agent, and who am I if I'm not a successful, small-time business owner, entrepreneur? There's the stress of sort of dealing with customers and having the conversations. There's a lot going on. Literally at this sort of in the last couple of days, this process started. So that's kind of where I'm at from a business point of view, is trying to exit and have that finished so I can focus on the next chapter. But it's a bit messy at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So would a goal for you to be able to transition into, so is it transitioning out of that causes stress, or transitioning into, like, committing to what is next?
Great question. It's a bit of both. It's the transitioning out, because it's all I've known in terms of an identity and building an income around that. So it's almost the anxiety of losing that safety net. But then also now I'm wanting to go into a career in the mindset space. I want to be a speaker for sports programs, schools, workplaces, obviously facilitating the podcast, staying in this space of trying to add value and impact people through the mind and the body, of course. What that looks like, though, exactly, I'm still working out. So there's a little bit of uncertainty, which is naturally anxiety producing.
So the letting go. So what I feel in that is, like, the letting go is difficult. Well, because you probably put a lot of your heart and soul into that business, and it can be hard to let go of something, because it is a death of sorts. And so that can bring up grief for what wasn't. But the fear comes from some sort of story that you're telling yourself about how difficult it will be to replace that. And so when we push up against something of, like, this feels uncomfortable, and that's the clue that for your listeners, if you're setting a goal and there's a tightening of the gut, or a constriction of the muscles, or you start to feel yourself clench your jaw, or you start to loop into worrisome thoughts, then there is a story you are telling yourself that is causing those physical responses in preparation for what you're going to have to do to appease that fear. Yeah. And so it always comes back to, if we are like a walking head and have lost connection to our body, then it is very difficult for us to have awareness of the patterns and the stories that we're running, because our body is what will always give us the first clues. And so the brain is telling the body a story, and the body is responding and then giving information back to the brain. And so we want to have enough presence with the body to be able to think, oh, I've had a tight knot in my stomach for the last, some people it can be like the last 20 years, but the more attuned and the more aware we become, we can be like, oh, I've had that in my stomach since this morning or for the last hour. And then the gift is, the clue, the tool is to think, okay, rather than making myself busy by doing more things to get my to-do list finished or to move the business forward so that I feel better, it's like, no, stop everything and drop into that. And so we close the eyes down and drop into breath. We can do it right now if you're happy to.
For sure.
Yeah. Beautiful. So just closing the eyes down and dropping into. Some people find deep breaths very difficult. So to make a sounding breath will help, like sounding on the out breath, like a yogic breath, will help you drop into the body. Some people, the body feels so tight, that feels uncomfortable. And so making the sounding breath will help drop you in. So just quietening the mind, imagining the thoughts dropping away like candle wax dripping down the back of the neck. And then coming into presence like the observer with our body. How does it feel? How does it actually feel to be with your body with no judgment, no fast urge to change anything that is present at the moment? Being the witness, and then further beyond that, being fully in your body, present to feeling what is going on. And then simply bringing the thought of the thing that you want to create into your mind's eye. What is the thing that I want to move towards in my life? And feeling into, how does that feel in the body? Does the goal feel expansive? Does it expand your energy? Does it drop you into a sense of having more space in your physical being? And so for you, Liam, when you think about being in the space of, working in mindset and working with schools and sports clubs, how does that make you feel?
I feel very good. Yeah, wow. I mean, I'm happy to unpack some just that little, 2-3 minutes, whatever it was, from my accounting, and which was really interesting, and I think super valuable for people listening and watching. So, firstly, funnily enough, even just, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but even just you relaying back to me before we started that practice, it was almost like you have a story. You almost, to some extent, again, I don't know if it was intentional, but like supporting the fact that, or almost just highlighting that I do have a story and it is scary, and it almost just felt like a safe space. That alone was just, I felt it, albeit small. I noticed, I don't know, I guess some tension in my sort of lower chest, just off the back of that, which was really interesting. Then kind of going into the body and really focusing on my breath and dropping in. I actually within about 2 breaths, I felt immediately better. So I felt immediately lighter in that sort of lower chest, stomach area, sort of diaphragm, I suppose, which was really nice.
Yeah.
I then became very aware of sore spots in my body, which I suppose I didn't like. Some tension in my neck, chest, my lower back from sitting in my little podcast chair here, that I didn't like. And then I felt a little tingle before I was really thinking about anything in the future. I felt a little sort of tingle throughout my body, which was quite calming. A little bit of like, I don't know if I had this exact language in my mind, but it was a little bit like, dude, it's all okay. The fuck are you stressed about? Like, that's my sort of language. Like that, just for a brief moment. So that feeling was quite enjoyable. And then thinking about the future for me was really just thinking a lot about having an impact on one hand, but it was also the lack of stress that's sort of in my travel business. So being able to sort of move past that and having waking up, without that, and having you mentioned expansive. That was the feeling. It was more vast and expansive and limitless, and not kind of captive to just the to-do list every day and what I have to do. So that'd be how I would sort of try and summarize that, I suppose.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
and so
really powerful.
What people can do is, when they're making decisions, is drop into the body and feel like, does this come from a place that like deeply resonates for me? Does this feel like something that will expand my energetic force? And people listening who've not done energy work before might be like, well, that's all well and good, but why would that matter in relation to my business? It matters because we are energetic beings. We literally, people feel us in the world. If we're expanded, our energy is out past our body and it is an exciting, happy, engaged energy, we naturally draw in the people that are going to resonate with the thing that we're trying to create. And I know for some people who haven't done a lot of energy work, that might fall into the category of a bit woo-woo, but I practice it every day. I practice it with my clients, and it makes the biggest difference when we are lit up energetically in alignment with our goals. So in contrast to that, if you are making a decision about something, or you're trying to figure something out, or it's bringing up tension, and you go into your body and it contracts you and constricts you, then the things that I would say are, have a conversation with that part of your body. Go into it and say, what could I be telling myself about this thing that is causing me to feel that way? And literally breathe so that you can either feel, see, or hear an answer. And we are not used to engaging with our bodies in that way, but there is so much wisdom that if we create a safe enough space, it will tell us everything we need to know about ourselves. And it's really, if people are looking for a simple tool of like, what can I do right now that will help alleviate stress in my life? It's hold space for it and ask it what it is trying to tell you. Often it is a fear response that is coming up to keep you safer because you are pushing your boundaries. Or it might be your intuition response saying, hey, this is maybe not the smartest decision. You're maybe trying to be somebody else instead of following your own guidance. And if you follow your own guidance, things will move to support you in that, whereas you're going to push against boundaries when you're trying to be somebody else or trying to fulfill somebody else's purpose around this issue. And so it's just learning to ask better questions from ourselves and show up for that. Now, in my sessions, for example, with you, and you were like, oh, there's parts of my body, what I would do is go into those parts and I would ask for permission to test, and I would find what emotions are stored there. And then once you've had a conversation, once we've held space for them, we would then release them. And so it takes it to a deeper level, but the people can start the conversation now on their own by themselves to just instead of trying to run away from their stress, actually hold space for it, because it is trying to tell you something.
That is, yeah, I agree aggressively, and just that little practice alone, you know, like I just shared before, was really valuable. And just a little quick anecdote to sort of wrap things up, and I'll just be respectful of your time, but I feel like we could just sort of explore this for a long period of time. It's super interesting. But for me, a month or two ago, mate, I'm not too sure, but for a period of time, I was just feeling really heavy and lethargic, and I was, I've always been quite motivated and ambitious to be, you know, entrepreneurial and build my business. And I was simultaneously trying to workshop the next plan for the travel business, whilst also exploring this, you know, personal branding business that I'm trying to, you know, move into. And it was all very messy, and I just felt very heavy, and I had this big to-do list. And then there was a couple of days in a row where I'd wake up, you know, all right, have my coffee, let's do this. I do one thing and I just fucking break down. I'm just like, why am I so fatigued? Now there's a host of reasons. Long story short, and sort of the point I wanted to make was I took time to do a 5-minute meditation to focus on my breath work. And then funnily enough, even prior to this conversation, I was actually going in with an intentionality of going, what do I want? Something's missing. I can't just be inherently, you know, miserable in this moment in time. What's going on? So, and I was almost asking that question, right? And I'm sort of giving this as like a real world example for people because it's fucking powerful. And so it's not like I come up with all the answers to life's greatest mysteries, although that might be part of my journey moving forward. What I was able to come up with really practically was, I'm lacking connection, and obviously COVID has affected so many people in that way. But man, I'm just fucking craving humans, and I want to be, because I do a lot of work as a solopreneur, and so I just need to be around people, having fun, doing things. You know, my personality is very, very much driven by, you know, the joy and laughter of others, and that was lacking in my life. So just that realization was, gosh, the realization alone was just so, I guess, from an energy point of view, enriching, and just and made me feel lighter and clearer in my thinking, such that I was able to then make decisions. And like you said so eloquently there, it is, and I love that. It's about what do I resonate with, like, and not just doing things because, you know, it's a decision you made 5 years ago that you're trying to stick to, or, you know what I mean? And so that was just a really cool example where I was able to work out, like, you know what, I just fucking want humans more regularly in my life. And that alone has improved my, you know, my quality of life the last couple of months. So quick little thing, but it's off the back of exactly what you're talking about, allowing space to just go in and ask those questions, and I guess wait for those answers, which, you know, at first glance, it is easy to put that into the whatever basket or the woo-woo basket. But ultimately, all I care about, what I try to promote on this show, is what works, what makes you feel good, what helps you move forward. That's all that matters. And so I feel like your job as a listener or viewer, whatever, wherever you're tuning in here, is to kind of, your job is to be the constant learner and get information from all different schools of thought, and then trial and error things and start building your own personal philosophy. And I just, you know, if anyone at all values my personal opinion, I cannot encourage this work we've only just scratched the surface of enough to start, you know, finding those answers and start alleviating some of those hurdles in the body, because very often that is what holds us back. So any final thoughts from you before we wrap things up, and I have to get you back on for another episode?
It's really a permission slip to be your unique self in your life, in your job, at home, and to stop conforming. We've been told, you know, happy, healthy looks a certain way, and, you know, if you're a bit miserable in your job, well, then that's okay, everyone's a bit miserable. And it's like, no, we get one life. And if something's not working, be curious enough to find out what it is, because it's not nearly as scary to face it as you think. And actually moving through that will often bring you closer to the things that you want, and light up gifts and give you permission in your life that, you know, ignoring it will actually deplete you. And if people can, you know, lean into curiosity around their blocks rather than fear, magical things can unfold, like genuinely magical things. You will literally leave sessions feeling lighter, happier, more connected to yourself. And who doesn't want that?
Perfect place to finish. Thank you so much for carving
Yeah.
out the time. Like I said, we've only sort of scratched the surface of this, but already I hope there's some value for people tuning in. Really cool. We got to do that mini practice and put me on the spot and go through that. But man, it was really, really cool. Where can people connect with you and find more about you and the work that you do?
Well, actually, my Instagram is the best place at the moment. My website's down at the moment; it's being rebuilt. So JulieAnne Kelly Wellbeing, is the best place. They can DM me or just follow my work from there.
Awesome. Well, an absolute pleasure, and look forward to connecting with you more off air. We've been fortunate to connect in recent weeks, so I look forward to building that friendship and diving more into these sort of conversations. So thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Liam. Cheers.